Oh, exotics. There's so many of them, and some of them are really bad. In a Reddit post from a couple of weeks ago, community manager DMG posted a comment asking about feedback regarding underperforming exotics. A survey was done on Reddit by user Kraken about people's opinions on the least used and most underperforming exotic weapons. I want to dig through this feedback and give my take on the situation and the results since, people asked me, and also, what else are we going to talk about right now? There were two parts to this poll. Number one, have you used this exotic in the last 6 months? And number two, how people thought certain exotics performed. The poll was not split between PvE and PvP, it is all use cases. The top 5 lowest used exotics in this poll were Wish Ender, Queenbreaker, Prospector, Darcy, and Legend of Acreus. And the top 5 worst rated exotics were Salvation's Grip, Skyburner's Oath, Darcy, Queenbreaker, and Wish Ender. There's not a lot to agree with in terms of the least used, because that's pretty objective information. No one's giving an opinion on if they used a weapon in the last 6 months, so I'm mainly going to be looking at the worst performing exotic list. And I gotta say, pretty in agreement with the list for the most part. However, something that I think some people do not realize is that exotics are not always meant to be good. They are meant to be unique. They're meant to let you adopt a certain playstyle or do a thing that you don't normally get to do, but that doesn't always mean that they're good. But there are some exotics that probably could be better than they are. So let's chat about what needs to happen to bring some of those into contention, and let's talk about which ones just don't need anything at all, even though the community just considers them bad. Salvation's Grip has utility in that it is basically a meme weapon that can launch some stasis, but it is using up an exotic and a heavy weapon slot at the same time. It provides very minimal value outside of incredibly specific stasis-based builds that you might be doing, and while I'm sure someone has a working build for something, most people are not doing it, or no one's doing it. Given the intended function of the weapon, I'm not sure what you could do to buff this at all other than providing more of a stasis effect, which would be fine because no one is running this for anything. Skyburner's Oath fits pretty squarely into the, it's a scout rifle category, but it doesn't really feel fun to shoot it aiming down sights in comparison to the grenade launcher mode. It fires very, very slowly aiming down sight, and shooting at hipfire is way more fun even if you're not capable of crits. The anti-phalanx shield part doesn't have as much flair either, with anti-barrier rounds just in the game now. When anti-barrier scout is so cheap in terms of its mod cost, and it works on more than just phalanx, why bother with skyburners? Also, I don't really care that much about the bonus cabal damage. This is a great example of the game just kind of shooting right past and evolving past the need for a gun like this. Darcy needs some big help. It used to actually be a DPS champion back in the Eater of World days, but unfortunately, I think this is just an exotic of its time that was left behind. It made sense then, it just hasn't been adapted to today's power levels. We've had Izanagi's Burden, Whisper of the Worm, and Cloudstrike all come out in a post-D2 launch situation where the weapon game has been more refined, and 2 of those are not in the heavy slot. A lot of people have suggested moving it to the special slot, which at the moment I feel like I could get behind, since right now it's essentially a 140 RPM sniper with a so-so exotic perk. We have Adored and Cloudstrike as arc sniper options right now, so it's not like the arc sniper slot is very crowded in that regard. I just don't think it would really be enough to bring Darcy to relevance. The fact that it's arc is probably the biggest appeal on the weapon. Queenbreaker was dominant back when you could just aim the thing at the sky and it would hit someone in Gambit, but since those nerfs, it, along with linear fusions in general, have been left in the dust. It's slightly better than legendary linear fusions when it comes purely to DPS, but even Threaded Needle has been making some waves without needing to use an exotic slot. This is simply another exotic being left in the dust and not keeping up with the insane power creep that we've had. The exoticness of this weapon is supposed to come from its versatility with its scopes and the blinding effect, but a blinding effect is available on more powerful things, and the versatility doesn't really matter enough combined with its other weaknesses. Wish Ender. Being able to see through walls has proven to be an incredibly strong effect in Destiny. There have been tons of nerfs, along with downright removal of the effect from the game. The problem with Wish Ender is that the seeing through walls effect in PvE is not important at all, which ultimately leaves you with a bow. Yes, it can deal slightly higher damage thanks to its overpenetration effect, I know, but most bow usage I've seen is because of the elemental damage that has been needed from one. In PvP, while the wall hack effect is good, you're not one-shotting people with the bow, and most other bows can get the job done as well. I think it speaks volumes that we have a wall hack effect in the game on this item, and still nobody uses it. It has amazing exotic flavor, but its performance doesn't, especially when we have things like TQs and Trinity Ghoul. I would say give it intrinsic anti-barrier, but I just don't know how much that would really help it, and it could interfere with other mods in the future if you wanted to use other seasonal champion mods. The next 5 up the list are Sleeper Simulant, Malfeasance, Cerberus +1, Leviathan's Breath, and Worldline 0. Sleeper Sim is getting buffed, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much in this video, but we're going to talk about the others. Malfeasance is a gun that I would love to see come into the limelight a bit more. It has such a cool look, great lore, great exotic feel, very fun perk. It's great against Taken. Against non-Taken, it's fine. Exotic primaries are tough, though. They really gotta be super strong in order to bust into the meta, and since this doesn't have a catalyst, you lose out on some of the orb gen as well. Malfeasance thrives on targets that will actually survive the 5 shots needed to trigger the exotic perk. The problem is that most garbage enemies don't survive that long, and special weapons work for bigger targets. They are just so strong right now, namely grenade launchers. Kind of feels like a trace rifle situation. It's not good enough to act like a special weapon, but it deals a lot of primary damage, except at least this uses primary ammo. But, unlike a trace rifle, you'll rarely get to see that exotic perk proc on most junk enemies, which is the fun part of the gun. Maybe a catalyst would lower this to 4 shots instead of 5, but that would have a very unknown effect on PvP, and I still don't feel like you would proc it that often on garbage enemies. This is a weapon that is already somewhat balanced, and outside of some minor damage tweaking and maybe a catalyst, I'm not sure what else should be done off the top of my head. Cerberus +1, in my opinion, is an underrated exotic, and that's not just because my wife loves the weapon. This gun, when in the ideal range, is dealing so much primary damage, and I think people sleep on it. Its problem is that once you start leaving that ideal range, which is pretty close, it gets much tougher to justify, so it requires some planning ahead, and it's just not going to work in every single activity or every single thing that you're doing. But the fact that people think this gun is weaker than Leviathan's Breath, Mida, Jade Rabbit is better than Cerberus? In what world? PvP? Meh. But PvE? No chance. I would argue this does not need a buff either. Maybe if you wanted to slightly buff the damage so it's more usable at range, sure. I don't think this gun needs any significant adjustments. Leviathan's Breath is a meme weapon, although not as much of one as I previously thought. Each shot individually does about as much as a Sleeper shot pre-buff. But Sleeper is getting buffed, and Sleeper with the Catalyst fires twice as quickly. Then you have Unstoppable, which is cool, but you need to use an arrow to stun a champion, and damage against unstoppable champions is not increased until after the stun, so you're just wasting a giant arrow to stun a target. This bow needs to deal full damage on the stunning shot, or it will, in my opinion, forever be garbage. I don't see this happening unless Bungie has a reasonable way to make this happen without breaking a bunch of other stuff. World Line 0. What a trip this thing has been on. Ultimately, I don't think people really value the Blink Strike attack that much, especially now when we have actual good legendary swords. Also, the Lament is here. It kicks ass. Not much reason to use World Line as a result. Really need that Blink Strike to smack some things around hard if you want me to care about World Line 0. It needs to offer more compared to what I normally get from a legendary sword experience. The next 5 on the list: Jade Rabbit, Borealis, Legend of Acreus, Wave Splitter, and Cold Heart. Jade Rabbit is a piece of crap and always has been, save for some very rare PvP moments. Any perk that requires you to go for the body as opposed to hitting headshots is garbage. Jade Rabbit is so bad that I actually hate this gun. It's one of the few guns that I hate in this game, and I think it's the only one that I hate because it's that terrible. The perk sucks. If you're gonna make me go for the body, that big shot better be worth it. Look what you did with Hawk Moon. Hitting bosses for 50k in the head while I plink plonk away with Jade Rabbit to get some shots back in my gun. I don't care about returning ammo. I'll reload. Thanks. I'm gonna be in a safe place in PvE with the scout rifle. Not a big deal. And Hawk Moon wants you to go for headshots, and Jade Rabbit is a scout rifle. Woo! Look at that damage on the perk. Good luck, Jade Rabbit. God, I hate you. Momentum control isn't even real anyway. Borealis. Kind of a relic of the past, serving a purpose that probably doesn't really need to be served that much. The ability to shift elements is very nice, but in group play isn't that vital to success. And the bonus damage to a target after breaking the shield is also nice, but doesn't appear enough during important gameplay for me to really consider it that valuable. Also, Disruption Break serves a very similar purpose without having to use or stay on Borealis, although it only works for one element as opposed to 3. The perk and the gun, they're not bad. I think it's pretty balanced. It's just not a game changer of a gun. The next 3, I don't feel deserve to be this low, but I don't have the best reasons to really justify that position. Legend of Acreus is a beast of a gun still, in my opinion, but it's just tough to warrant its use in endgame content currently. Ridiculously short range, never gonna do anything with it in GM content, and slug shotguns are simply outdoing it right now. But it still chunks targets really hard. I don't think it needs a buff. I feel like Acreus just kind of flows with whatever the meta happens to be, and it just so happens that the meta isn't in its favor, but it also hasn't been since, like, the Crown of Sorrow, like Season 7. I mean, it's gotten sporadic use since then, but I don't think a damage buff or anything makes people use it. Unless it's an unreasonable buff, it simply needs a situation to thrive in, and then I think you'll see it again. Wave Splitter and Cold Heart. I think these guns are solid. I don't think they need any buffs at all, especially with Trace Rifle mods coming into play now. I think they fit their roles pretty well. I want to see how people adapt or don't adapt to using Trace Rifles in the game now that we have mods. Either way, I don't see them getting buffed or nerfed at all in any significant way, and you should check out my video on Trace Rifles for more on these weapons. The next 5, and the last 5 that we'll be looking at, in the bottom 20, are Tommy's Matchbook, Merciless, Polaris Lance, Symmetry, and Lumina. We're pretty firmly in, yeah, they're not top tier, but there's not much to buff about them kind of territory right now. I gave Tommy's Matchbook some flack in my What Should You Buy from the Exotic Vendor video, but I don't think I was completely wrong in doing so. The weapon can put in some work for sure. I'm not saying it can't. So why don't people use it? I think people just don't like hurting themselves, even though there's a plethora of ways to stay healed, but in higher end content, that effect can be a liability. And it's a gun that succeeds the most when you can just hold down the trigger the whole time. But the amount of times where you're going to be holding down the trigger like that for that long, is probably not very often. A lot of people start and stop, so if you're doing that, it can just end up feeling like an auto rifle. Merciless, I think, is finally working again, but is unfortunately victim to being a fusion rifle. That is its only crime. I think it's a really neat weapon. It's fun to use when you get to spray the hell out of something. Fusions just haven't been it in PvE for a while, and there are plenty of other PvP fusions to use that will do way more than Merciless. This is another weapon that individually could maybe use the slightest buff, but it's mainly the whole archetype. Although apparently a couple of fusions have been making waves on Atheon, which would say to me that maybe Merciless is some secret tech, and I will be investigating that. Polaris Lance. I am shocked that it is this far along on the list. I truly am. It relies a ton on crits. Obviously the fact that it's a scout holds it back, but also the explosion effect, the main perk. Just not very good, isn't it? The explosion hits as hard as a single crit from the gun itself. The catalyst is just Dragonfly, and that's way more fun. You gotta buff this explosion if you ever want me to use Polaris Lance. Symmetry, I think, is actually a really neat and, dare I say, slightly underrated weapon. Those Seekers hit really hard, and I do enjoy the back and forth mechanic. The problem is that while Dead Man's Tail is around, most other scout rifles are just not going to compete. I went ahead and used Symmetry in a Master Nightfall to see how its performance was there. It's a 260 RPM, which is nice because you want to ramp into that 20x revolution ASAP. And it's a fun experience, and the alt-fire mode is pretty fun, and it hits super hard, but man, in Season 14 especially, it is tough to even consider using a primary in general other than for champion stunts. The Disgraced Strike, also maybe not the best strike for Symmetry. This would work better in other strike with more scout rifle lanes. Also, the mental barrier of not wanting to switch to another weapon while using this one because you want to play with the alt-fire can be a tough one to break, especially since the alt-fire is almost special weapon-like in nature. But I don't think Symmetry needs any major tuning. Finally, Lumina. It's a support weapon. It's very niche in what it does. I just don't think it really needs too many adjustments. It's just tough to use because the weapon itself is a basic hand cannon, and the buff you can give people in low and mid-tier content isn't really that vital, but using it in endgame is just a little bit tougher to pull off. The top 5 most powerful exotics voted were Anarchy by an overwhelming margin, Dead Man's Tail, that goes without saying, Wither Horde, guessing that's mainly because of this season in particular, but overall it is certainly good, Xenophage, and then Trinity Ghoul. Love seeing Trinity Ghoul up there. Can't say I really disagree with much here. I'm not a huge Xenophage guy, but it has such great versatility and it works wonders with certain Warmind cells, so it's tough to argue against it. I'm also not a big Wither Horde guy, so if I was going to take something out, it would be Wither Horde, and I would push Ariana's Vow in here. I think it's just absolutely insane with the Catalyst. Bad exotics. You know, some are pretty bad, and some need some help, but some are just slightly weaker due to their archetype, and some are actually pretty well balanced and just don't see a lot of play. I think that's definitely okay that not every single exotic is S tier, but I would not mind seeing some of those D tier exotics get some love. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.